Great. Thank you, Naomi. I'm really happy to be here. I want to start by saying that at the SF Fed, our vision in community development is for a healthy and inclusive economy in which all people can participate and no one is left behind. And in order to work toward that vision, we conduct research and convene and foster partnerships to remove the structural barriers to economic opportunity for low-income people and for people of color. And we know that childcare is a significant barrier to economic opportunity for many families. So I'm excited to be here to talk about this. And I just want to start by saying the views I expressed today are my own and not necessarily those of the SF Fed or the Federal Reserve System. So lack of childcare is obviously essential to our economy. Given its important work, it really fits into the Fed's larger mandate for maximum employment. So today I'm going to be talking about how childcare is important to our economy, to reducing gender and racial gaps, and also just want to highlight the point that childcare as a sector has been undervalued and overlooked. I'm also going to share some data from the 9 Western states, which is the SF Fed's district. So first I want to start by just highlighting that childcare is critical for our current and our future workforce. Here you can see that about a third of the US workforce has children under 18. And also when we think about all of the growing research around the importance of the early years, we note here that children under 6 have all available parents in the labor force. So the opportunities provided by childcare providers are really essential for laying the groundwork for our future labor force. And our research also tells us that childcare affects work decisions. This survey conducted prior to the pandemic by Care.com showed that nearly 2/3 of parents had made career and workforce changes based on childcare costs. For example, they changed jobs for higher pay, asked for a more flexible schedule, or switched from full-time to part-time to save money. We also know from this survey that people make a lot of household financial decisions based on childcare. For example, respondents reported accruing more debt to afford childcare, stopping saving money, stopping paying off debt, and making other cuts to household spending. And so we know that there are important implications for households in terms of job decisions, in terms of financial decisions. And also, it's important to highlight that moms especially felt the impact of childcare on their careers. In this survey, over half the moms who were surveyed reported scaling back on their hours to save on childcare, and 25% of moms left the workforce altogether. And indeed, historically, women have really borne the brunt of childcare responsibilities, and this pattern continues to this day. While 93% of men who have children under 6 are employed, this share is only 64% for women. And in addition, time use survey data tells us that across all income levels, working women spend more on childcare, more time on childcare responsibilities than men. And this disproportionate impact is really important. This current recession has been described as a women's recession, and women's unemployment has risen sharply, more sharply than men, particularly for women of color. And part of this decline stems from the fact that women are more likely to work in service industries that have been hard hit and don't allow for remote work. But at the same time, we're seeing that the burden of childcare really plays a story in contributing, plays a part in the story about women leaving the labor force. So despite these challenges, women's contributions to household earnings has increased over time. So in 1967, 28% of mothers contributed at least a quarter to household earnings, and that has risen to 64% in 2017. It's important to note that these numbers vary by race ethnicity. So here you can see for Black women, they're much more likely to be the main breadwinner, and combining with contributing at least 25%, childcare plays a really critical role in ensuring household stability for Black families. And what's important to note here is that labor force participation for Black women is higher than for other racial ethnic groups, for women in other racial ethnic groups. And Black and Hispanic workers are more represented in low-wage jobs. And so the other thing is, looking at time use survey data, we see that Black women spend more time on work regardless of the presence of young children, which is higher than the other racial ethnic groups. So really, when we put all that together, and we also realize that now in the US, the majority of young children are now people of color, we really see that we have an opportunity to invest in this future workforce and to ensure that we are reducing these racial and gender gaps in our economy. So to illustrate a little bit about how this sector has been undervalued, there's a lot of different ways to make this case, but I wanted to really focus on childcare workers and how childcare workers struggle to make ends meet. And what's really important to note here is we have all this research telling us how important this time period is, and we still see that workers in the sector are not paid well. So here is a chart that tells us, on the whole, childcare workers make $10.72 per hour on average, and that's at the second percentile of earnings. And kindergarten teachers, by contrast, are making at 61%. I'm sorry, $31.29 an hour, which is at the 61st percentile. So this is a useful comparison because kindergarten teachers are often working with children who are around the same age or slightly older. And so this tells us a really interesting story about childcare and how childcare workers are not being paid well. And there are significant racial ethnic issues here, racial ethnic disparities here as well. So you can see here that 1 in 6 childcare workers are living in poverty, and that this number rises to 1 in 4 for Black childcare providers and 1 in 5 for Hispanic childcare providers. And it's also important to note that the childcare workforce is almost completely women. So these disparities are really significant and important. And also just in general to note, 59% of childcare workers live in households that make incomes below the national median. So I'm going to share a little bit of data across the Federal Reserve's 12th district, which is the 9 western states. Here you can see that in the United States, over half of people live in childcare deserts. And for our states, the majority of them are higher than that. We range from 48% in Arizona to 77% in Utah. And the way that this is defined is that a childcare desert is a census tract with more than 3 children under age 5 for every licensed childcare slot. And this chart shows us that for the United States on the whole, low-income people are more likely to live in childcare deserts. And this holds for most of our states across our district, except for Utah, Alaska, and Idaho. So while we know childcare supply is an issue, so is cost. So I'm just going to give a little snapshot here. Childcare, this is infant care costs by state, which ranges from $7,500 for Idaho to nearly $17,000 for California. This is the annual cost of infant care. And you can see here, this is cost for a 4-year-old, which are slightly lower, $6,500 in Idaho to about $11,500 in California. And just to give a little more context around these numbers, if we look at the cost of infant care as a share of the state's minimum wage earnings, we get a sense of how much families, low-wage workers in particular, are paying in childcare costs. In Arizona, it's 48%, and in California, 68%. And putting a little context on this number, the federal standards suggest that families shouldn't be paying more than 7% of their income on childcare costs. So we are a long ways away from meeting that standard. So to summarize, childcare is essential infrastructure. We know it's critical for people to be working, and also it represents an investment in our future workforce. And I want to really, for us to consider this question, is childcare a public good or a private responsibility? We know that national public subsidies reach just 15% of eligible low-income families. And we also know that these subsidies do not cover the care costs in most cases. So finally, I'll leave you with this question. What is your role? What is your role in supporting and bolstering this critical sector of the economy? And I want to acknowledge in the very real struggles and challenges that COVID has posed to us, we also have an opportunity to reimagine this sector and to really bolster it for our shared economic prosperity. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Naomi. Thank you.